Do we all see recording in top left of our screen?
Yep.
Okay. So who's going first?
I got it. So welcome to the podcast. And because of like the craziness in the world, we just kind of decided that we can take a break and talk about books. I love books. I know Jack does too. I'm hoping you guys do.
I do.
So yeah. So just sorry, my brother. Anyway, let's just start it out with a question. So before this, I asked
do
you
we have your guys'
guys.
names yet?
Oh, my name is.
Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Declan.
Sorry. Okay.
Senior this year. Yeah.
Oh. Oh, can you say that again?
My name is Declan. I'm a senior this year.
My name is Paige, and I'm a junior this year.
Awesome. I almost forgot about that. So, typically per week, how many hours do you guys spend reading?
Well, I'm currently taking a British literature class, and this is probably the most reading intensive English class I've taken all of high school.
Agreed.
Yeah, typically we have to read. For me, I usually spend 2 hours every other school day reading.
Oh, wow.
That's typically what the class kind of merits, along with the work that we have to do in addition to the reading, like the analysis. So I would say probably about 4 hours a week, something like that.
For me, it kind of depends on the workload of the week because I'm taking AP European History. So just for that class, we usually have to read a few hours a week. And then just for the reading I do for fun, so probably like overall 5 hours at least every week.
Wow. And within all that time, do you guys get any personal reading stuck in there?
Unfortunately, no. I kind of wanted to spend the stuff. See, I have a pretty extensive list of like personal reading that I've been wanting to do for a while now, but I just haven't gotten around to, mainly because these past 2 years I've been taking a lot of AP classes, and most of the reading that's involved in those classes is like textbook reading and textbook work. So because of that, I've kind of gotten demotivated from trying to do any reading for leisure, which is kind of sad because there are just so many great books that I've kind of cracked open and I've started reading but haven't been able to finish just because of how much work I've had to do reading wise that's school related. So
Yeah, I haven't fit in as much leisure reading as usual. Like in the summers when I don't have a bunch going on, I usually average about a book a day, but now it's probably a book every few weeks.
That's very impressive. I could not pull that off at all. So since you don't do a ton of you guys don't do a ton of personal reading nowadays, when you guys were younger, did you read a lot for fun?
It's kind of hard to say. Probably the only book that I really recall reading in my formative years that still kind of stuck with me was The Hobbit, and that was actually part of a school assignment as well. And it was required reading. We had like a selection of books that we choose from, and I chose to read The Hobbit. And I actually spent most of the year reading that book. And there was a point where when I was kind of really young in elementary school, teacher took notice of my reading level and kind of gave a book to challenge my my level of reading that I can't remember the name of. But yeah, unfortunately, I haven't done a lot of leisure reading kind of in general. But I would definitely like to, yeah.
Yeah, as a kid, from the point I could start, like the point I noticed I could read and really enjoyed it, I started leisure reading, and it just started, like, the older I got, the more it picked up, and like it kind of goes like in waves with how much I read, judging off like my schedule and stuff. So I read more with the more free time I have, but like it really started when I first read I want to say Call of the Wild. It was either that or White Fang by Jack London. That's kind of this book where I noticed like, hey, this is kind of fun.
Yeah, I mean, you guys all already kind of answered this, but what book was really important to you in your formative years? And can you give like a quick rundown of the plot? I mean, I know The Hobbit is probably not easy, but if you could try.
Yeah. Well, I actually, it's kind of hard to say because I have a few books that I've read throughout my life that have been just my formative years have been really pivotal to me, really important to me. The Hobbit certainly being one of them because from a young age, the other thing about me, apart from kind of taking an interest in literature, is that I love movies. I actually started the film club at this school, and for that reason, I've always taken an interest in Tolkien and the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Silmarillion, all of the books that he wrote. And so the first book that I read of his was The Hobbit, which is essentially kind of a prequel to the Lord of the Rings, and it's dealing with the life of Bilbo Baggins instead of Frodo Baggins, and kind of introduces the character of Gandalf. Right? It's from what I remember, it was close to, oh my God, how many pages are in that book? Something close to 300 pages. So it's a pretty extensive book, but the thing that I love about that book is that it's the thing that got me into fantasy literature, and it's the thing that got me into this whole idea of writers building these vast, expansive worlds, just with pen and paper, right, and just their imagination. I mean, there are so many things that I find inspirational, incredible about Tolkien. Probably first and foremost, the fact that Tolkien, when he wrote The Hobbit, he took a lot of inspiration from a lot of really old British literature. One of those books actually being the first book that we read this semester in British Lit, which was Beowulf. Pretty much one of the biggest plot points of The Hobbit, which is Smaug, the dragon, is ripped right from Beowulf. So it's because of that book that I've gotten really invested, not just in fantasy literature, but also in it's the reason why I'm taking this British literature class. So I would say that's why it's so important to me.
That's awesome.
For me, it was I believe it was Call of the Wild, which, for those of you who haven't read it, it's only like a couple hundred pages. Like, it's not a huge book, but it's like one of the classic novels, and the entire thing is it takes place during the gold rush, and it's basically, I'm pretty sure it takes place in Alaska. It's kind of hard to tell because the entire point of view is from a dog, and because as a kid, you gotta love dogs and animals, and there's a book about dogs, and it was just like kind of a cool historical fiction world, which just kind of got me into this world of fiction. Just like, hey, you can be anything they want it to be. They can go off and they can bring in historical references, they can reference other writers, or they can do their own thing entirely. And it's just always been like super fascinating and interesting because you kind of get into the head of the writer yourself, and you can go off and create those stories too.
Funny you say that, Paige, because I've been getting to writing a little bit myself recently, like 1,300 pages since March. We're not going to discuss that part. But I wanted to discuss a book called On Writing by Stephen King. It's like half autobiography, half guide on how to write. And just, if you wanted like a little window into how books are actually written, this is a super interesting one that I recommend.
Yeah, I'd be interested. That's another thing that I kind of wanted to mention is that if it weren't for literature, if it weren't for the books that I've read, I would not be interested in writing whatsoever.
Absolutely.
And for me, creative writing has always been kind of an on and off hobby, and it's something that I'm not particularly great at, but it's just, I've always been very interested in kind of the way that authors build their universes, build their worlds, right? And how they come up with something that's so unique and original. Because it's really easy to plagiarize, and it's really difficult to not take straight from history, right? Straight from historical events. It's hard, especially I think the most impressive writers probably, in the last century are any number of science fiction writers, because they have to predict, not only a future, but also something that's so distant from what we know, something that's so foreign and alien from the world that we're accustomed to. So that's why I think science fiction is probably the most impressive genre of literature that there is. And it's kind of, for a while, it's kind of a laughingstock. In decades before, certainly before our generation, right? Science fiction wasn't really a genre that was admired, right, or appreciated for its value. But if you look at a book like, I don't know, Fahrenheit 451, that's completely applicable to everything that we're witnessing in the world right now, right?
Yeah.
This sort of dystopian future. So I think there's a lot of merit for every genre of literature. I think that's probably the biggest takeaway for me from any book.
Well, yeah, because like people don't tend to take it seriously, especially with that like sci-fi, fantasy, dystopian genre. These are people predicting, they're looking at what they see and in their perspective predicting what it's going to become. And that's really impressive, especially when, like in Fahrenheit 451, it becomes almost scarily true. Even if there's some new words in there and stuff, it's sometimes scarily accurate, and it's impressive. Like, all of these people are incredibly smart, and the fact that they took what they saw and were able to write their own unique story using their perspective of the world, that's like totally their own thing, that's not easy to do. Like, I play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm the game master, so like I come up with those stories, and it's not easy. Lots of the time you just base it off of stuff as you go, and they're doing it all on their own, just looking at the world and being like, this is what's going to happen, or I'm going to write a fantasy story, but there is going to be hints of reality. It's so impressive.
Absolutely. I mean, some of my favorite books have been dystopians too. Like The Giver. I just love that book. I think it's a dystopian.
Yeah.
But
yeah. I remember.
Oh, Jack, yeah.
Oh, well.
Oh, I thought.
Am I going to say something? I might, actually. Kind of on the same topic as dystopian and sci-fi. We have something called Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. I have here the sequel, which is Children of Ruin. It's kind of like, oh, hey, guess what? People aren't so good. We blew up the world because we're bad people. And so now, like, there's just people going out on these arc ships for eons and millions of years just in cold sleep. And you kind of experience them as they wake up again and again and again to deal with problems of just the ship getting ruined, meeting life, which also happens to be intelligent fighters. The thing. It's actually really entertaining, but it's a thing. So if you're looking into the dystopian side of it, I would definitely recommend this one.
Yeah. I mean, and adding on, something I was going to ask is, I find that a lot of people who love reading also love writing. Like, is that true for you guys?
Yeah, that's definitely true. Not to go like super into
Oh,
Is it coming out?
It froze.
yes. We lost you there. Oh.
Should I just
I mean, yes. Go.
looks
Oh,
like it cut
hello?
out there. Sorry.
All right. You want to say your
Yeah,
thought again?
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, something that I've kind of struggled with throughout high school is finding a good balance between my interests and hobbies, because I have a few. And but one of them has always been, I've always taken an interest in creative writing. And like I said before, it's always been kind of an on and off thing, but I think most of my investment in writing comes from escapism. I think that's probably the thing that a lot of fantasy writers and a lot of science fiction writers and just writers in general really value, is this ability to use writing to kind of escape from reality and create your own reality. And so that's kind of, the comfort that I've taken in being able to occasionally, like, write a little story or kind of, create this own world of mine, is just being able to escape from kind of the worst facets of reality, which, it's really prevalent today, right? I would have no doubt that people right now are probably their most creative, and they're probably
I haven't seen that one before.
I'm sure he's saying something really nice.
I just
Very
haven't seen
inspirational.
cameras speed up like that before when they cut out.
Yeah, the audio cutting out completely is a new
it's
one.
cutting out.
The
It's cutting
audio-
out, yeah.
That's okay. I get what you're saying, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know at what point I cut out, but yeah.
Yeah, for me, like, I like writing, specifically creative writing. I just don't get around to it quite as much because, like, I always get frustrated because, like, even if I clearly hear it in my head, like, writing it down on paper always just frustrates me because it doesn't come out the way I want to. I'm just not patient enough yet. Only thing I really do more often with writing is occasionally poetry. I'm not a huge writer, but I do enjoy it as long as it's creative writing. Like, I hate writing essays and stuff. It's like when I have like free reign over the story and stuff, I love writing a good story.
Okay, so Paige, I have a suggestion for you. If you have trouble with getting like how you want everything to go, just make a new document and start journaling or whatever you want to do. It's the longer you write, the more you're going to get into that rhythm.
Oh, we should quote that or something. Good advice. All right.
That every writer says.
Yeah. All right. Bringing it a little bit more simple, what is your guys' favorite genre of book?
It's kind of a tough one for me because I've been talking a lot about fantasy, specifically like medieval fantasy, because I love all of the really early legends in history, like the Arthurian legend and stuff like that. I really do enjoy that type of literature. But at the same time, all of last year, I took AP Lang last year. That was the English class that I took. And we primarily were reading nonfiction, right? Works of nonfiction. And sorry, I'm not sure if I'm cutting out.
Yeah, you are a little bit, but
The video is cutting out. If you need to, you can turn the video off.
yeah.
Okay.
That might be
Yeah,
a
we'll
good
see
idea.
if that.
Yeah, maybe we'll make it easier.
Okay, yeah, let's see if that helps.
Okay.
So yeah, as I was saying, I took AP Lang, and that entire class was based around nonfiction. It was the first English class that I took that wasn't, the curriculum wasn't based on literature. And so that entire year I spent reading works of nonfiction and like biographical works. One of the books that I started reading was, it was a translation of Suetonius's 12 Caesars, which is a biography of the first 12 emperors of Rome. And I was also taking AP European history at the time. So I kind of got really invested in I was just interested in reading about ancient history and people from history and, the history of certain countries and nations. That's also what led me into taking British literature. But yeah, it's hard to say definitively whether I like fiction or nonfiction more, because I think I've read a bigger volume of nonfiction and biographical works and just essays on historical events. I I think what I read most of is probably like essays in my free time and just articles. So if I were to say definitively, my favorite genre would probably be nonfiction.
Okay.
That is actually quite a hard question. For me, I'd probably say I'm just a big fiction person, but it's always like it's kind of realistic fiction, if you will. It's like it's not entirely like everything about it is made up. Like it's pretty realistic. Like everything else is normal, and there's just little bits of it that are like, well, that's impossible. Like my favorite author, actually, his name is Sean David Hutchinson. I actually have one of his books right on my desk here. I had to read this sophomore year. That's how I discovered him. We Are the Ants. And it feels almost like a real book. Like if you're reading it, it's almost hard to believe it's fiction, but it is. And it just like touches in on so many different things. So like I love a good fiction book that gets philosophical and almost questions morals, and like it honestly goes into contemplating existence, and that you're just, but it does it in such a smooth way. It doesn't like give you the classic I have a migraine now. It's entertaining, and you're invested in it until the very end. I love a good book like that. It's just not all of it is real stuff. There's some fiction aspects in there, and it almost is perfect, just showing that sometimes that little bit of creativity and art can help you understand these huge concepts that are hard to grasp.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite book of all time is probably The Book Thief. And I don't know, I end up reading a lot of World War II books just cuz, I don't know, but I think historical fiction, like where it is real but some elements aren't, I think I appreciate those a ton.
Yeah, I have The Book Thief on my desk too. It's one of my favorite books of all time. Like I love a World War II novel, but I think honestly this one might be the best one I've ever read.
Absolutely.
It comes in from a point of view most people haven't seen, and it's just like
so good.
The metaphors in it are so entertaining and like beautiful, honestly. And it's entertaining, and you're crying, but you're gonna read it anyway, and it's just such a good book.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever cried more to a book than reading that one. Like, oh, so good.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so I'm probably the only person here who really votes for fiction and definitely fantasy. I lean towards. I don't know if any of you have heard of this one. It's called The Witcher.
I've heard of it.
Dude.
I haven't seen it yet. Not seen it, read it yet. I have seen it actually, because there's a TV show adaptation on Netflix. Real good, actually. I have wanted to read it though.
Yeah, the short stories are so interesting because it's reinventing these ancient traditions of like Firebird. I don't know if that's actually one of them, but just thinking like the Firebird. Let's remake this as a Western fantasy creature, and let's make this guy who has silver swords fight it. And it's so interesting to see how that series develops over time. Because you move more from mercenary dude goes to fight monsters to mercenary dudes really likes protecting his daughter. I'm not kidding either. And it's a really good book series. You should read it.
Wanted to read it for a while, so now I'm just going to use this as an excuse to go impulsively buy some of them.
Exactly.
Bingo.
All right. So, Paige, you kind of mentioned this, but what are your guys' thoughts about books being turned into movies and TV shows?
It's kind of a touchy subject because a lot of people, the popular opinion is like when a book gets adapted into a TV show, or if it gets adapted into a movie, normally the adaptation is a butchery of the source material. I think probably the best example of an adaptation done probably as perfectly as you can get it would be The Lord of the Rings. I've only read through most of Fellowship, but I've seen the entire trilogy of movies. And from what I gather from like what I know about, the universe and its characters, most of the way that the characters are depicted and the setting is depicted in like the series of events is correct. But if you want to talk about a butchery of source material, that would be Game of Thrones. Because there are actually a lot of very minor details that when I first picked up the first novel in the series, which is A Game of Thrones, there are some really subtle aspects about the book that were changed when it was adapted into the TV series. Like the ages of characters are completely wrong. Most of that I think was changed for the sake of like the TV show gets pretty gratuitous, with its violence and whatnot.